Translator, Salavan and Rykov. Translation checker, Pew Pew Laser Gun. Editor and proofreader, Leo of Zion Mountain and Dale Ligerkeys. Like Luo Bing's cold and resolute heart. The sword was destined to miss because of the great disparity between Luo Bing and Yang Kai's strength. She was still mid-thrust when Yang Kai had already disappeared. But her sword did hit something. A sturdy figure suddenly appeared in front of Luo Bing, looking at her with a compassionate yet complicated look. Luo Bing couldn't pull back in time, and along with a puncturing sound, the sword pierced directly through the sturdy body, going in 10 centimeters, causing blood to splash out everywhere. Luo Bing instantly froze in place. She was completely stunned as she looked at that stalwart figure and gasped, "Big Brother Chai." The person who suddenly appeared in front of her and took the sword in the chest was Chai Hu. With Chai Hu's first-order Dao Source realm cultivation, it would have been easy to evade her blade. Even if he didn't want to avoid it, he could have easily blocked it by circulating his source chi, but he did not do that. He let Luo Bing vent with her blade. Luo Bing, who was determined to die, finally panicked. She came here in order to ambush and attack someone. She didn't intend to get out of here alive. If she couldn't kill Yang Kai, then she wanted to at least die at his hands so she could be reunited with her father in the underworld. She came here with the determination to die, but hurt Chai Hu instead. Chai Hu's chest was soon stained crimson. Luo Bing's pupils dilated at once, as if the crimson had blotted out the light before her, filling her entire world with this shocking blood. The huge psychological shock caused Luo Bing's tender body to weaken, and she almost fell to the ground. Chai Hu reached out to hold her, and not only that, but he also took her arms and slowly pulled her towards himself. Luo Bing could not resist him, and it didn't matter if Chai Hu was merely pulling her over, but the sword in her hand was still stuck in Chai Hu's chest. With this movement, her sword plunged even deeper. Chi chi chi. The sound of metal cutting through flesh was ear-piercing, and in the blink of an eye, the sword had already passed through his chest. Luo Bing's pretty face turned icy pale in an instant, and she called out in a panic, "Big Brother Chai, what are you doing? Stop." But no matter what she said, Chai Hu remained unmoved. The faces of Chi Yue and the others all changed. They never would have thought that Chai Hu would do such a thing. By the time they came to their senses, Chai Hu had already pressed Luo Bing's body completely to his chest, and he whispered in her ear, "Young Master Yang killed your father, so I will pay back this debt in his place. Don't point your sword at him. Stop, stop. I don't want revenge anymore. I won't try to take revenge ever again, so let go, Big Brother Chai." Luo Bing's face was filled with tears in an instant. Feeling the warmth at her chest, how could she not know that it was Chai Hu's blood? She was at a loss at that instant, and deep inside, she was filled with self-blame. If she hadn't acted so rashly, coming here to cause a ruckus, then Chai Hu wouldn't have done such a thing. She had not known Chai Hu for long, and the two of them couldn't be considered too close either. However, at her most difficult and most dangerous moment, it was Chai Hu who swooped down like a soldier from the heavens in order to save her. Even if it was for his own selfish reasons, Luo Bing still could not forget that mighty figure that suddenly appeared and sheltered her from despair. The feelings of her maiden heart were suddenly touched, and that figure was branded into the softest part of her soul. During these few months of wandering around, she felt even more nostalgic towards that sense of security, and the light sentiments floated around like a cellar of old wine, constantly fermenting in her heart, making the figure in her heart grow even more vivid. But when she saw him again, her sword was pierced straight through this man's chest, almost killing him. After decades of living a pampered and carefree life, was this heartbreak she had to bear now the price of that? If so, then even if she had to live a simple life, she wanted him to be safe and sound. "Get away from him," Chi Yue bellowed and thrust her hand out, pulling Luo Bing away and tossing her heavily to the ground. Gui Zhu and the others quickly went forward to check on Chai Hu's injury. After landing on the ground, Luo Bing didn't care about her own situation at all. Instead, she stumbled over to where Chai Hu was, her pretty face out of sorts from her tears. Her expression was filled with self-blame and regret. After a short while, Gui Zhu finally let out a sigh. Fortunately his heart wasn't hurt. "It's not too serious." While speaking, he took out a pill and stuffed it into Chai Hu's mouth. With a flick of his hand, he sent the sword flying before pushing his source chi into Chai Hu's body to dissolve the medicinal efficacies and heal him. "I'll bring him back first so he can recover." Then, Gui Zhu picked Chai Hu up and began flying towards the Thousand Leaves sect. Before leaving, Chai Hu coughed lightly. "Don't give her too much trouble, she has her own difficulties too." Chi Yue sighed. Was there a need to go so far? What happened today was inexplicable, but Chi Yue could vaguely see that something was up. Something was definitely going on between her fourth brother and this little princess from Skycrane City. In just a few moments, everyone else had already left, leaving behind Chi Yue with a frown on her face. Meanwhile, Luo Bing was now kneeling on the ground, looking towards where Chai Hu had left, sobbing as he continued to mutter incoherently, "I don't want to take revenge anymore, big brother Chai, don't die." She kept on repeating those words as tears continued to fall down like a string of pearls, forgetting that Chai Hu was already long gone and completely unable to hear her. Looking at her appearance, Chi Yue couldn't help but feel a trace of compassion and sighed as she said, "He won't die. You didn't injure him too heavily." Upon hearing this, Luo Bing snapped her head up towards Chi Yue and cried with relief, "Thank you, thank you." While speaking, she folded her hands together and closed her eyes, praying to the heavens as her tears continued to flow down her cheeks. You're on your own now." After that, Chi Yue's figure flashed, and she quickly left with the others. Luo Bing was left alone to pray, the sad and beautiful scene overflowing in the wilderness. A month later, Yang Kai arrived at a place called Marsh City. This city was located at the border of the Southern Territory and Eastern Territory. The reason he came here was that he needed to visit the Netherworld sect in order to look for information about Coco's whereabouts. Based on his guesses, there was a high possibility that Coco landed with Yin Lesheng after coming out of the Starlight Corridor. As for how he was going to find it, Yang Kai could only improvise. He couldn't ask Yin Lesheng directly. After all, there was still a grudge between the two of them, and the latter also knew he had a star source on him. Netherworld sect was a top force in the Eastern Territory, on par with Azure Sun Temple. This information was given to him by Yi Hen. Yi Hen also told him that cultivation materials were the scarcest in the Southern Territory, and the world energy there was also relatively thin, so the overall level of cultivators was relatively low. However, in the other three regions, the overall level of cultivators was much higher than that of the Southern Territory. There were absolutely less than 10 sects as powerful as the Netherworld sect in the Eastern Territory, while only 4 such sects existed in the Southern Territory, showing the great disparity between them. The Eastern Territory also had one dominant sect, which was the Serene Soul Palace founded by the Supreme Soul Great Emperor of the 10 Great Emperors. There were rumors that the famous Spirit Beast Island and Dragon Island were both located somewhere on the Eastern Sea, but nobody could confirm whether this was true or not. After all, these two islands were simply like mere mirages in the distance for ordinary cultivators. Seemingly influenced by the Serene Soul Great Emperor, many of the Eastern Territory's sects and cultivators cultivated some soul type or malevolent secret arts, such as the Netherworld sect. So, the cultivation world in the Eastern Territory was vastly different from the Southern Territory. While walking around in the Eastern Territory, one should be very careful, otherwise, if one found themselves in bad company, one may even lose their life. During the past month, Yang Kai passed through many cities and used the space arrays of those cities. If not for this, it would be impossible for him to reach Marsh City at the border of the Southern Territory in just 1 month. Just by flying, with Yang Kai's current speed and cultivation, it would have taken him several years to fly here. The vastness of the star boundary was simply beyond his imagination. After arriving at Marsh City, Yang Kai did not rush over to the Eastern Territory. Instead, he found himself an inn to settle down in. Since this was the junction between the Eastern Territory and Southern Territory, not only could the cultivators of the Southern Territory be seen in Marsh City, but also many Eastern Territory cultivators were present as well. Yang Kai stayed here because he wanted to inquire about the general situation in the Eastern Territory, especially about Netherworld sect. Then, he could spare himself the trouble of searching around in the dark once he entered the Eastern Territory. Among the cultivators walking in the streets of Marsh City, many of them exuded unruly auras that were evil and violent. Even their looks were fierce and frightening. One could tell at a glance that they were from the sects of the Eastern Territory. Moreover, the security situation in Marsh City was absolute chaos. Even though there existed a city lord's mansion with a master keeping watch, Yang Kai had already seen quite a few fights happening in less than 1 day of him arriving here. A few people had even died. Not to mention that such a thing was simply unimaginable in Maplewood City, such a thing would not happen anywhere in the Southern Territory. While the fights were taking place, Yang Kai could clearly perceive the auras of many masters around the area, but nobody tried to stop them. It was only after the fights ended that the masters showed themselves and dragged away all the people involved in the fight. Then, they took off the space rings of the cultivators and left their bodies on the streets to rot. These masters were obviously from the city lord's mansion. It seemed that it was a good thing for them that the cultivators were fighting. That way, they had an excuse to capture people and make some extra money for themselves. Yang Kai did not want to cause any trouble, so he thought of hanging around a tea house or a restaurant for a couple days before departing. Since all sorts of people mingled in these places, he might be able to eavesdrop on some information he needed. After asking around, Yang Kai began heading towards the largest Delightful Pleasures tea house in Marsh City. In a short while, Yang Kai arrived in front of the tea house. Looking at it, this tea house was built to look quite dignified and was 5 floors high. For such a tea house to appear in such a chaotic place, it could be seen that the background of this tea house's owner definitely couldn't be small. They may very well be related to the city lord's mansion. Yang Kai took a step inside and was immediately greeted by a shop hand with enthusiasm.